A wounded woman arrives at a stream, where she washes her injuries and hears the distant howl of a wolf. The woman enters a cave and kills a wild beast. Meanwhile, a young girl named Peggy sits beside a pool reading a magazine. A boy swims up and invites her to join him, but she declines and glances toward her father, Chris, who watches the gathering from a distance. Belle, Chris's wife, approaches and hands him a beer. Chris instructs her to keep a close eye on their daughter. Belle, protective, forbids Peggy from interacting with the boy. Nearby, another child of Chris and Belle observes as a group of boys harass a girl, attempting to undress her. Brian, their son, watches the disturbing scene intently. After the party ends, Brian is the first to get into the car. He tells his father that Peggy has been seen walking with a boy on multiple occasions. Chris is visibly displeased by the revelation. That evening, the family returns home. Belle rolls herself a cigarette, and Chris takes one for himself. Later that night, he rides an ATV into the forest to hunt. At dawn, Chris reaches a river and spots the wild woman bathing. Intrigued, he follows her to discover where she lives. That evening, he returns home and orders his family outside to help clear debris from the storm shelter. He then spends the night inside, constructing something in secret. The next morning, Chris returns to the cave, throws a net over the wild woman, knocks her unconscious, and drags her back to his property. Meanwhile, Peggy falls ill during class and goes to the restroom. Brian, who attends the same school, enters the classroom while other students play outside. He takes a comb from a classmate's backpack and sticks chewing gum to it. Chris brings the wild woman to the shelter, chains her to the wall, and attempts to examine her mouth. Suddenly, she awakens. In a shocking moment, she spits out a wedding ring and swallows one of Chris's fingers. Screaming in agony, Chris punches her in the face and retreats to the house to treat his wound. Later, armed with a gun, Chris returns to the shelter. He tightens the restraint so she cannot move and fires a shot at the wooden wall. He tells her the act was both revenge for his injury and a warning, intended to teach her not to behave that way again. Chris returns home and announces that the entire family should accompany him to the cellar immediately. He informs them that he has found a woman in the forest and intends for the family to raise her. This, he explains, is his personal experiment, his attempt to transform her into a normal person. He assigns tasks to each family member. Peggy is sent to retrieve the first aid kit, while Belle prepares food for the woman. They place the plate in front of her and observe her closely. The woman, feral and unresponsive, breaks the plate and growls at them. Chris calmly remarks that next time they should use plastic utensils. Using a rake, he pushes the porridge toward her, stating that she'll eat when hunger sets in. Afterward, the family returns to the house for dinner. That evening, Darlene visits the shelter and plays music for the woman. Meanwhile, Chris enters Peggy's room and speaks to her about her life. He calls her a good girl and tells her he loves her. Later, Belle questions her husband about the morality of keeping the woman locked in the cellar. Chris responds with a brief, dismissive answer and goes to bed. The next morning, Chris heads to work. He's a lawyer. His secretary brings him documents and discusses current tasks. Chris interacts with her more politely than he does with his own wife. At school, Peggy refuses to participate in gym class. Her teacher notices her withdrawn behavior and growing emotional distress. She lies down on the grass and begins to cry. Back in the shelter, the wild woman struggles to break free from her restraints. Exhausted, she eventually leans forward and begins eating the porridge. Chris's secretary visits him again, and he flirts with her, offering compliments. Later, he picks up Peggy from school, and they drive home together. Meanwhile, Ryan approaches the shelter and slightly opens the door to peek inside. Belle catches him and sternly warns him not to go near the woman. When Chris arrives home, he instructs Ryan to feed the dogs. Ryan complies, then secretly returns to the shelter and drills a hole in the door. Chris questions Ryan about his whereabouts, and the boy claims he was walking the dogs. Chris, Belle, and Ryan then head to the shelter together. Chris orders Ryan to clean the floor, then sends him outside. He intends to wash the woman himself. Ryan asks to stay and watch, but Chris refuses. Chris begins scrubbing the woman with scalding hot water. He asks Belle to bring another bucket, but she stands motionless, watching her husband touch the unfamiliar woman. "Don't look at me like you're jealous," Chris says. "This has to be done." Belle continues to observe silently. She picks up a board and approaches her husband, locking eyes with the wild woman. For a moment, she seems inclined to help, but instead, she points out a loose fixture in the wall. Chris thanks her and asks her to complete another task. He then takes the woman outside, ties her to a barrel, and begins washing her. Peggy pleads with her father to stop what he's doing, but he ignores her. In desperation, she shuts off the water supply. Chris and Belle then return the wild woman to the cellar, where Chris forces his wife to dress her. That evening, he brings the woman food and water. Starving, she agrees to eat using a spoon. After the meal, Chris teaches her a new word, thank you. Meanwhile, Peggy's teacher calls the family's home phone to leave a voicemail informing them that Peggy may be pregnant. However, a girl answers the call and deletes the message before the parents can hear it. Later that night, Chris waits until Belle falls asleep, then sneaks out to the cellar. There, he begins undressing the captive woman. Unbeknownst to him, Ryan follows and secretly watches his father's actions. When Chris returns home, he quietly climbs into bed and embraces his wife. Belle begins to cry, knowing exactly where he had gone. The next morning, Belle enters Peggy's room to wake her for school, but Peggy refuses, saying she doesn't feel well. That afternoon, Ryan returns home, believing the house is empty. He retrieves tools from the barn and heads to the cellar, where he undresses the woman and begins to torture her. Hearing her screams, Peggy rushes to the cellar and later tells her mother everything. When Chris arrives home and learns what Ryan has done, Belle confronts him. She tells her husband that their son assaulted the wild woman. Chris, disturbingly unfazed, insists that it's normal and nothing to be concerned about. Horrified, Belle declares she's leaving him and taking the children. In response, Chris violently strikes her until she loses consciousness. At that moment, Peggy's teacher arrives at the house. Chris seats Belle at the table and allows the teacher inside. She informs him of Peggy's possible pregnancy, but Chris denies it, claiming he knows everything about his daughter's life. As his anger escalates, the teacher attempts to leave, but Chris blocks her path. He accuses her of lying and slaps her across the face. Then, he orders Ryan to bring ropes. Together, Chris and Ryan drag the teacher to the barn and tie her to the fence. Peggy tries to intervene, but Chris blames her for everything, hurling insults and shoving her aside. Peggy runs into the house and retrieves the key to the cellar, determined to free the wild woman and seek help. Belle regains consciousness and also heads toward the cellar to stop her daughter. Meanwhile, Chris and Ryan lock the teacher in a cage with starving dogs. The woman tries to hide, but a monstrous creature emerges from the kennel. Ryan refers to it as his sister. The creature viciously attacks the teacher, leaving behind only torn flesh. At the same time, Peggy successfully frees the wild woman. She exits the cellar and encounters Belle, whom she immediately attacks, devouring half of her face. The woman then storms the barn, killing Ryan and Chris in a final act of revenge. Afterward, she calms the dog and enters the house, where she finds a young girl. Gently, she takes the child's hand and leads her away. Peggy follows them into the forest, choosing to begin a new life, one free from the horrors they've escaped. And that's where the film ends. If you found this breakdown compelling, leave your thoughts in the comments, like the video, and subscribe to the channel to be the first to catch new releases. Have a great day.